Carl Jung talked about this phenomenon he described as retrogressive restoration of the persona. It's a complicated idea, but basically what it means is that sometimes you take a leap forward and you learn some things, but you can't catalyze a new identity, so you try to go back and hide in your old identity. And that actually doesn't work because, well, things have changed and you've learned something and that isn't who you are anymore. And so it's like you have to cut parts of yourself off in a destructive manner to fit back into the person that you were. Now what happens here is that Pinocchio escapes from this tyrannical situation and undergoes this descent into chaos, but he tries to go back home. He tries to go back to what he was. And he can't do that anymore. His father isn't at home anymore. And so when he goes home, he finds that there's no home there. Now, this happens to people sometimes, and it's often a shock to them. So they'll often stay under the thumb of their father. And you think, well, why would someone do that? Because it means they're subject to the tyrannical judgment of their father. They're always concerned about what their father would think or whether their father approves of them, and so forth. And you think, well, that's got to be an unpleasant place to be. Why would you do that? Freud said, for example, that no one could be a man unless his father had died. And Jung said, yes, but that death can take place symbolically. Okay, so there's that part of the idea. And then another part of the idea is one of the times in your life when you actually realize that you're an individual is when you'll go and ask your parents something and you'll realize they actually don't know any more about what you should do than you do. And that sucks. And that's partly why people are often willing to maintain a tyrant-slave relationship with their father. It's like, on the one hand, you have to be inferior in a relationship like that. You know, you've always got the judge watching you. But on the other hand, there's always someone who knows what to do. There's always someone standing between you and the unknown that you can go ask, what should I do? Well, at some point, you'll realize that the reason you can't ask that anymore is because they actually don't know any more than you do. And then that's a pain. Like that is a symbolic death. And that's also when you establish a more individual relationship with your parents. It's at that point that you could conceivably start taking care of them instead of the reverse. And that's a time that should come. But you...
For a long time, I always thought what I wanted GMB to be because I had to face that at a very early age. Like many of us do. And we ask questions. And we don't get answers. Then I started looking at everything and everybody. Started noticing there's levels, there's good, there's bad, that you gotta work hard. Some people get a little easier, some people have it harder. All these different things. And like my last video, I always notice nature isn't particularly fair to anybody. Life isn't particularly fair to anybody. So at a young age, I was told to look at history. That it could help me see mistakes. So, if I don't want to make the same mistakes, you could look back. People wrote down their mistakes. People wrote down how they lived. Shit. Now, the one thing I realized was at least 80% or maybe 70 of people have to build and work and all these things. Shit, 100% of people, everybody gotta work some way or another. We all live in these places, this earth. Like I said, with the shenanigans, the storms, all these things happening. Seen it back then in history. Like many other people. And I realized the Lord literally gives everybody their chance. Because everyone's book or history goes to, eventually some beginning. And then we go back further and we thought that was the beginning. And then they find out there was a civilization before then. And civilization before then. And a civilization. It just keeps going. And they keep dating it further back. It always made me think. Because I do believe in fairness. I do believe in being better. But to be better, you have to be given the opportunity. And the thing that I've come to notice about the Bible and other books, everyone has their turn. Everyone gets their chance to rule. And all those civilizations are gone. And we're the remnants of these people. Somehow, some way. We all live on the same planet. They ain't doing nothing but digging these things up, finding these places in places that people don't go anymore. And it made me realize exactly why I started being GMB in the first place. Because I'm on the bottom. And no matter how you like it, even if you're on top, you have to serve. We all serve somebody. When it comes down to these things happening, we all eventually serve each other. Like when that last thing happened with the little worldwide crazy shit. First time in a long time I've seen people helping each other. Scared to be next to each other, but people talked. Everyone was aware of their mortality. And all the little differences didn't mean anything anymore for a little bit. The differences always mean things, but they really don't mean anything. When I formed GMB, it was because I seen everyone not understanding that when things happen, people are needed. This is why we have policemen, firemen, EMTs, and doctors, and all these things. We used to have things called neighborhood watch. We used to have neighborhoods. I was talking to an old lady today. She reminded me about 95 or 94 or something like that. Because we were talking about the weather, how it's really warm. She's like, yeah, I always remembered around this time it was a blizzard. Ever since I was a little girl. I wasn't alive when she was a little girl. But when I was young, I remember it snowing all the time too. I don't know what's happening or when. I just look around and watch these things. And the one thing I learned from all these different stories, from all these different religions, from all these different chosen people, no one understands the Lord the way I do. In my eyes, we're all chosen to live, to experience this thing, whatever we call it, life, existence, reality. We're all chosen for that. So there has to be levels. Me, I never minded being, where I am. I forgot what I was doing it for. Because of all the bullshit that goes on this level. All the confusion. It's to make people realize who else is helping you. Who gave you answers? The Lord doesn't give me answers and talk to me in my head. I read books. I read the Bible. I go by the words. And I match it up to what I think is good. And in times of reality, I think back to those words. I think back to the Hopi people. They taught peace. Just like all the other religions. All the other people around the world. In their faith.
You have to let that image of perfection go. And that exposes you. Well, that's what happens here. Pinocchio goes home and he wants things to be the way they were, and he wants to stay under the careful care of the benevolent father, but that's no longer possible. He's past that point, and that's why the father has disappeared. And so Geppetto has gone off to look for Pinocchio because he also needs his son, but in any case, the house is abandoned. And so then we see inside the house that everything's covered with cobwebs and everything's gone, and Pinocchio and the crickets sit on the steps and they're very concerned. First of all, they wonder where he went, so they're actually concerned that he's gone, but they also don't know what to do because there's just no going home. And so, that's also the case that once you hit a certain point in your development, well, it's the same thing we already talked about. The answers that you're looking for are not going to be found in your parents' house. It's as simple as that. Now, you could artificially maintain your dependency, but, if you do that for too long, things get pretty ugly. Peter Pan is this magical boy. Pan is the god of everything, roughly speaking, right? And so it's not an accident that he has the name Pan. And he's the boy that won't grow up. And he's magical. Well, that's because children are magical. They can be anything. They're nothing but potential. And Peter Pan doesn't want to give that up. Why? Well, he's got some adults around him, but the main adult is Captain Hook. Well, who the hell wants to grow up to be Captain Hook? First of all, you've got a hook. Second, you're a tyrant. And third, you're chased by the dragon of chaos with a clock in its stomach, right? The crocodile. It's already got a piece of you. Well, that's what happens when you get older. Time has already got a piece of you. And eventually it's got a taste for you, and eventually it's going to eat you. And so Hook is so traumatized by that he can't help but be a tyrant. And then Peter Pan looks at traumatized Hook and says, well, no, I'm not sacrificing my childhood for that. So that's fine, except he ends up king of the Lost Boys. In Neverland, well, Neverland doesn't exist, and who the hell wants to be king of the Lost Boys? And he also sacrifices the possibility to have a real relationship with a woman, because that's Wendy, right? And she's kind of conservative, middle-class, London-dwelling girl. She wants to grow up and have kids and have a life. She accepts her mortality. She accepts her maturity. Peter Pan has to content himself with Tinkerbell. She doesn't even exist. She's like the fairy of porn. She doesn't exist. She's the substitute for the real thing. And so, but the dichotomy that you're talking about is very tricky, because there's a sacrificial element in maturation, right? You have to sacrifice the pluripotentiality of childhood for the actuality of a frame. And the question is, well, why would you do that? Well, one reason is it happens to you whether you do it or not. You can either choose your damn limitation, or you can let it take you unaware when you're 30, or even worse, when